The cabin was unusually quiet for a full flight. Soft lighting washed over the first-class section, reflecting off polished wood panels and neatly arranged seats. Flight attendants moved with practiced calm, greeting passengers in low voices, careful not to disturb the atmosphere of controlled luxury. This was the kind of flight where people expected comfort and deference. A man entered with his family and took their seats without drawing attention. He wore simple, dark clothing, no designer logos, no loud confidence, just calm movements, deliberate and unhurried. He helped settle his family first, making sure everyone was comfortable before sitting down himself. No one paid him much attention, at least not at first. A few rows away, another passenger shifted loudly in his seat. He was already irritated, tapping his fingers, sighing dramatically, looking around as if the cabin existed to serve him alone. When the family adjusted their bags and seats, it seemed to push him over the edge. His voice cut through the quiet. Loud, sharp, public. "Can you people hurry it up?" He snapped, not bothering to lower his tone. "Some of us paid for this cabin." A few heads turned. The man with his family didn't respond. He didn't even look up. He calmly finished buckling a seatbelt, his expression unreadable. The passenger scoffed. "I mean seriously," he continued, louder now. "This isn't economy. If you don't know how to behave up here, maybe you shouldn't be sitting here at all." The words landed hard. A flight attendant paused mid-step. Another passenger shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between seats. The tension was sudden, like the air pressure in the cabin had changed without warning. Still, the man remained silent. He didn't argue. He didn't defend his family. He didn't react the way anyone expected. That seemed to irritate the passenger even more. He leaned forward slightly, voice dripping with arrogance. "Unbelievable," he muttered loudly. "People like this always think rules don't apply to them." The insult wasn't subtle anymore. It was deliberate, public, directed not just at the man but at his family. For a moment, it felt like time slowed. The quiet in the cabin deepened. Conversation stopped. Even the hum of the aircraft seemed to fade into the background. And then something strange happened. Instead of escalating, the situation stalled. The man finally looked up, not with anger, not with embarrassment, but with a calm so controlled it felt unsettling. His eyes met the passengers briefly. There was no challenge in them, no threat, just a steady, composed gaze that didn't flinch or retreat. The passenger hesitated. Just for a second. He straightened in his seat, suddenly unsure why the room felt different, why the confidence in his voice had evaporated so quickly. Around them, people sensed it too. Something was off. This wasn't fear. It wasn't dominance. It was restraint. And in that quiet first-class cabin, surrounded by strangers thousands of feet above the ground, one thing became painfully clear. The man who had just been publicly disrespected was not someone you wanted to misjudge. And the silence that followed, it was only the beginning. First-class cabins were designed to feel separate from the rest of the world. Up here, noise was controlled, movements were measured. Even impatience wore a polished mask. Leather seats, private screens, soft lighting. Everything whispered the same message: you belong here, if you fit the image. This cabin carried people who were used to being obeyed. Executives scrolled through emails without urgency. A couple discussed investments in low, confident tones. Another passenger reclined comfortably, already sipping a drink before takeoff. It was a space where money spoke quietly, and everyone listened. And in places like this, appearances mattered more than manners. The man with his family didn't match the unspoken uniform. He wasn't loud, he wasn't flashy, he didn't announce his presence. No expensive watch catching the light, no designer jacket draped casually over his seat. Just clean, simple clothing, practical, unremarkable, almost intentionally so. That alone made him stand out. People noticed him the way they notice a scratch on a polished surface, subtle, but distracting. A few glances lingered longer than necessary. Not curious, evaluating, judging. The entitled passenger took that judgment personally. To him, first class wasn't just a seat, it was proof. Proof that he had earned something others hadn't. Proof that he ranked above strangers he didn't know. And seeing someone who didn't look like him sitting there, that bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He shifted again, crossing his arms, scanning the cabin as if looking for agreement. His eyes landed on the man's family, then flicked away quickly. The irritation hadn't faded. It had only been delayed. Around them, the crew tried to restore normalcy. A flight attendant offered drinks, her smile professional but slightly tense. Another adjusted overhead bins with exaggerated care, aware of the fragile mood settling over the section. They had seen moments like this before, quiet conflicts fueled by ego and entitlement. Usually they ended loudly, but this one hadn't.
Yet.
The man sat still, hands resting calmly, posture relaxed. He leaned slightly toward his family, speaking softly, reassuringly. Whatever had been said earlier hadn't shaken him. If anything, he seemed grounded, present in a way that felt deliberate. That composure was unfamiliar to the cabin. Confidence here was usually performed, loud, visible, demanding. This was different. This was internal. A woman across the aisle noticed it first. She paused mid-scroll on her phone, watching him from the corner of her eye. Something about his stillness didn't fit the environment. It wasn't passive. It was controlled, as if he had nothing to prove. The entitled passenger noticed the looks, and that irritated him more. He leaned back, scoffing under his breath. Unreal, he muttered again, just loud enough to be heard. They really let anyone in here these days. A few passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. No one responded. No one laughed. The silence denied him the validation he wanted. In his mind, first class was a hierarchy, and hierarchies demanded order. Someone had stepped out of place, and he felt it was his role to correct it. What he didn't realize was that the balance of power in the cabin had already begun to shift. Not because of authority, not because of status, but because people were starting to sense something beneath the surface. The man didn't avoid eye contact. He didn't challenge it either. He existed comfortably within himself, unmoved by the social tension unfolding around him. That kind of presence unsettles people who rely on dominance. The plane doors were still open. Boarding announcements echoed faintly from the terminal. Yet inside the cabin, it felt like everything had narrowed, as if the space itself was waiting. Waiting for a moment. The entitled passenger exhaled sharply, tapping his foot, now restless. His earlier confidence had dulled into irritation. Something about the man's silence bothered him more than a confrontation ever could. Because silence leaves room for doubt. And doubt is dangerous to ego. The man adjusted his seat slightly and looked forward again, attention returning to his family. To him, the cabin was just a space, not a stage. But to everyone else, it was becoming clear that this wasn't just about seating. This was about perception, about assumptions, about what happens when arrogance meets restraint. And although no one in that first-class cabin could have explained it yet, they all felt the same thing rising quietly beneath the surface. This situation wasn't finished. It was only settling into place. Have you ever seen confidence that didn't need to be loud? Let us know what you noticed first, the entitlement, or the silence. The man couldn't let it go. For someone who had spoken so confidently moments earlier, he now looked unsettled, like the silence around him was an insult of its own. He shifted in his seat again, glancing toward the calm man and his family, then away, then back again. He wanted a reaction. And when he didn't get one, his irritation sharpened. You know, he said suddenly, loud enough to cut through the cabin again, this is exactly what's wrong these days. Heads turned. The flight attendant closest to them paused, fingers tightening slightly around her service tray. She didn't interrupt. Not yet. The man leaned forward, elbows resting on the armrests, voice carrying that polished arrogance people use when they believe they're untouchable. People think because they bought a ticket, they can act however they want, he continued, no awareness, no respect for the space. His eyes flicked briefly toward the family, long enough to remove any doubt about who he was talking about. The insult was no longer indirect. The man beside his family remained still. His expression didn't change. He didn't look embarrassed, or offended, or defensive. If anything, he looked patient, as though listening to something he had heard many times before. That composure only fueled the aggressor further. He let out a short laugh. Honestly, it's embarrassing, he said. This section used to mean something. A ripple of discomfort moved through the cabin. A couple across the aisle exchanged glances. A man a few rows back lowered his headphones slightly, listening now. Someone behind them shifted in their seat, clearly uneasy. Still no one spoke up. The aggressor took the silence as permission. Some of us actually follow rules, he added. We don't bring chaos with us wherever we go. The word chaos lingered in the air, heavy, unfair, loaded. The man finally looked toward him again. Not sharply, not angrily, just enough to acknowledge that the words had been heard. For a split second, their eyes met, and something changed. The aggressor's voice faltered, barely but noticeably. He cleared his throat, straightening in his seat as if to reclaim control. What? He snapped. You've got something to say now? The cabin seemed to hold its breath. The man didn't respond. He turned slightly back toward his family, his hand resting calmly on the armrest, posture relaxed. It was a quiet dismissal, not rude, not defiant, but unmistakable. That was when the aggressor crossed a line. He scoffed loudly. "Figures," he said. No response. "That's usually how it goes." Then, with a sharp edge to his voice, he added, "Must be nice to just sit there while everyone else has to deal with the inconvenience." The word inconvenience landed hard. It wasn't just insulting, it was dehumanizing. A flight attendant stepped closer now, her smile tight, professional. "Sir," she said gently, "let's keep voices down while we prepare for departure." He waved her off without even looking. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." No one nodded. No one agreed. But still, no one challenged him. The man beside his family remained silent. The restraint was deliberate now, almost palpable. He adjusted slightly in his seat, taking a slow breath, as if grounding himself. That calm was no longer neutral, it was controlled. The aggressor noticed it too. His tone shifted sharper, more pointed. "You know," he said, leaning back with a smug smile, "some people confuse silence with dignity." The woman across the aisle frowned. A man nearby shook his head subtly. The mood had turned, not against the family but against the speaker. He didn't see it. "I mean, look around," he continued. "This isn't some free-for-all. There's a standard." He gestured vaguely at the cabin, at the leather seats, the polished surfaces, the carefully curated atmosphere. "People pay for this experience." That's when the man finally spoke. Not loudly, not emotionally, just enough. "We all did," he said calmly. The words were simple, unremarkable. But the way he said them, steady, grounded, cut through the noise like a blade through fabric. The aggressor blinked. For the first time since the exchange began, he looked uncertain. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly caught off guard. The response hadn't been confrontational. It hadn't been defensive. It had been factual, and facts don't leave much room for ego. A few passengers shifted now, sensing the shift in energy. Someone exhaled softly. Another leaned back, eyes fixed forward, listening intently. The aggressor forced a laugh. "Sure," he said. "That's what they all say." But the confidence was gone. His voice had lost its edge, replaced by something brittle. The man didn't reply again. He didn't need to. The cabin had changed. What started as entitlement had become exposure. What was meant to humiliate had quietly backfired. And although no one yet knew who the man truly was, one thing was becoming increasingly clear to everyone listening. The passenger who had chosen to escalate the situation had made a mistake. And the consequences, whatever they were no longer in his control. The cabin didn't return to normal. It hovered in something quieter, thicker. The brief exchange should have ended things. A calm response, an awkward pause. Usually, moments like that dissolved as people retreated into their screens and private worlds. But this one didn't, because the man didn't retreat. He sat exactly as he was, steady, composed, unmoved. His shoulders relaxed. His breathing slow and even. Not the posture of someone trying to win, but of someone who had nothing to prove. That unsettled the aggressor more than any argument could have. He shifted again, clearing his throat, glancing around the cabin as if searching for confirmation that he was still in control. But something had changed in the room. Eyes were no longer on the family. They were on him. The man across the aisle pretended to adjust his seat, but his attention stayed fixed forward. A woman a few rows back lowered her phone completely now, watching openly. Even the flight attendants moved differently, quieter, more cautious, as if aware they were walking through a fragile moment. The aggressor felt it. Silence has weight when it's intentional. And this silence wasn't awkward, it was deliberate. The man leaned slightly toward his family again, speaking softly. Whatever he said wasn't audible, but the effect was immediate. The tension in their shoulders eased. They nodded. One of them smiled faintly. That small, human moment did something powerful. It reminded everyone watching that this wasn't a performance. This was control. The aggressor scoffed again, though this time the sound lacked confidence. "Unbelievable," he muttered, mostly to himself now. "Just unbelievable." No response came. The man didn't even look in his direction. That was when irritation shifted into discomfort, because ignoring someone who thrives on attention is the most effective way to dismantle them. The aggressor leaned back, arms crossed, jaw tight. His foot tapped against the floor faster now. He glanced toward the aisle, then back again as if expecting intervention, validation, something. Nothing came. The cabin held its quiet. Minutes passed. The plane door closed with a muted thud. The safety demonstration began. Normally that would reset the mood, a signal to move on, but the air remained tense. The man watched the demonstration politely, eyes forward, hands resting calmly. He didn't fidget, didn't sigh, didn't show the slightest sign of agitation. That composure was no longer just noticeable. It was commanding. People sense strength before they can explain it. It's in stillness, in restraint, in the absence of noise where noise is expected. The aggressor felt smaller now. He glanced sideways again, then quickly away, as if avoiding eye contact with something he didn't understand. His earlier arrogance had drained, replaced by an uneasy awareness that he may have misjudged the situation entirely. And misjudgment, once realized, is terrifying. The man finally shifted just slightly, adjusting his seatbelt. The quiet click echoed louder than it should have. The aggressor flinched, not physically, internally. The man's eyes moved briefly, scanning the cabin, taking everything in, not in a suspicious way, in a measured way, as if assessing without emotion. That look passed over the aggressor for less than a second, but it was enough. The aggressor swallowed. For the first time since boarding, he said nothing. The engines began to hum. The plane started to taxi. Conversations remained muted, cautious. People spoke in whispers now, unsure why they felt compelled to. The man closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, calm as ever. There was no triumph in him, no satisfaction. Just patience. That was the most unsettling part. Power usually announces itself. This didn't. It waited. The aggressor stared straight ahead now, shoulders rigid. His body language betrayed him, the bravado gone, replaced by tension. He had lost control of the situation without realizing exactly how, and worse, he didn't know why. That uncertainty gnawed at him. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. A flight attendant passed by, checking belts, her eyes lingering for a moment on the man before moving on. The look wasn't judgmental, it was respectful, a subtle shift, almost invisible, but once seen, impossible to unsee. The aggressor noticed that too. His fingers tightened around the armrest. Whatever he thought he had walked into this flight with, authority, status, confidence, it was slipping through his hands, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Because silence, when wielded deliberately, does something words never can. It exposes. And as the aircraft rolled forward, lifting slowly from the ground, one truth settled heavily over the first-class cabin. The man who had been publicly disrespected wasn't waiting to react. He was waiting for the moment when reaction would no longer be necessary. And that moment was getting closer. Once the plane reached cruising altitude, the cabin should have relaxed. Seatbelt signs dimmed, screens flickered on, drinks were prepared. This was usually the moment when people exhaled, when tension dissolved into routine. But not this time. The quiet lingered. It moved differently now, no longer heavy with confrontation, but alert, observant. As if everyone in first class was subconsciously waiting for something they couldn't yet name. The man sat calmly, eyes forward, posture unchanged. His presence no longer blended into the background, it anchored the space. Passengers began to notice small things. The way he spoke softly to his family, never once glancing back toward the aggressor. The way he listened more than he talked. The way nothing about him seemed reactive. Across the aisle, the woman who had been watching earlier leaned slightly toward her seatmate. Her voice was barely audible, but her eyes stayed fixed forward. "There's something about him," she whispered. Her companion nodded slowly. "Yeah, he's not ordinary." A few rows back, another passenger subtly searched his phone, glancing up repeatedly, comparing faces. He frowned, then locked his screen, unsettled by whatever thought had crossed his mind. The aggressor noticed the whispers. He sat stiffly now, arms crossed, staring straight ahead. He didn't look at anyone, not even at the window. His confidence had collapsed inward, leaving behind irritation mixed with doubt. That doubt grew as the cabin crew returned. A senior flight attendant approached the man's row first. Her tone was warm, respectful. She asked if everything was comfortable, if they needed anything. It was standard protocol, but the way she spoke was different. Slower, intentional. She didn't glance at the aggressor once. The man smiled politely, thanked her, declined assistance. His voice was calm, even gentle. The interaction was brief, but it sent a message. The aggressor watched it unfold, jaw tightening. He noticed how the attendant's posture straightened slightly, how she lingered for half a second longer than necessary before moving on. That wasn't accidental. People like him noticed hierarchy instinctively, and something about this hierarchy had changed. A man a few seats away leaned back, folding his arms thoughtfully. "Funny," he murmured to no one in particular. "How the loudest person in the room usually has the least control." His seatmate nodded. The aggressor heard it. His shoulders stiffened. He wanted to say something, anything, to reassert himself, but he didn't, because now words felt risky. The cabin was watching. Minutes passed, then more. The plane cruised smoothly through the sky, yet inside, it felt like everything was narrowing, like the story was pulling itself tighter, focusing in on a moment that hadn't arrived yet. The man remained patient. That patience did something strange to the people around him. It made them curious. A passenger across the aisle finally leaned forward, pretending to stretch, and glanced more openly now. Her gaze lingered on the man's face, familiar, but not obviously so. She tilted her head slightly, searching memory. Where had she seen him before? The aggressor noticed her stare and looked away quickly. His discomfort was no longer subtle. The man's family laughed softly at something he said, a quiet, normal sound. It contrasted sharply with the tension that had filled the cabin earlier. Life, unbothered. That contrast exposed the aggressor more than any confrontation could have, because while the man remained grounded, the aggressor sat trapped in his own thoughts. Had he gone too far? Had anyone recognized the man? Why did the crew seem careful? A faint ripple of movement traveled down the aisle as another crew member leaned in toward the cockpit. Her voice was low, professional. The exchange was quick, almost invisible, but those who noticed it felt a shift. A subtle one. The aggressor noticed it too. He watched her disappear behind the cockpit door, then glanced toward the man, then quickly away again. The idea settled uncomfortably in his mind. What if this wasn't just a passenger he could dismiss? What if he had misread everything? The man looked up briefly, catching a glimpse of the cabin, the eyes, the whispers, the attention. He didn't seem surprised. If anything, he seemed unsurprised. That realization unsettled several people at once, because it suggested this wasn't new to him, that he had walked into moments like this before, and chosen restraint every time. The plane hummed steadily forward, carrying them all through the sky, and somewhere between the silence, the glances, and the growing awareness spreading seat by seat, one truth became impossible to ignore. This wasn't about an argument anymore. It was about realization, and realization, once it begins, doesn't stop quietly. At this point, what would you be thinking if you were in that cabin? Curious, or already uneasy? Tell us what stood out to you most. The shift didn't announce itself. It arrived quietly. A senior member of the cabin crew stepped out from the cockpit and paused in the aisle. She didn't rush. She didn't scan the cabin. Her eyes went directly to the man. That alone was enough to change the atmosphere. She walked toward him with a calm urgency, professional, controlled but unmistakably respectful. The kind of respect that isn't trained, but instinctive. The aggressor noticed immediately. He straightened in his seat, watching her approach, his mind racing. This wasn't routine. He had flown enough to know that. The crew member stopped beside the man and leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice. "Sir," she said gently, "may I speak with you for a moment?" The man looked up. His expression didn't change. "Of course," he replied quietly. No confusion, no surprise. As if he had been expecting this. A few nearby passengers leaned in unconsciously, pretending not to listen while listening to everything. The cabin had gone so still that even a whisper felt loud. The crew member hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then spoke again. "Sir, are you Steven Seagal?" The name didn't echo. It didn't need to. It landed. The man nodded once, calmly. That was it. No announcement. No reaction from him. Just a simple confirmation. But the effect on the cabin was immediate. The woman across the aisle inhaled sharply, her hand flying to her mouth. The man a few rows back froze mid-motion, eyes wide. Someone whispered the name again under their breath, as if saying it twice would make it real. The aggressor felt his stomach drop. The blood drained from his face so quickly it was visible. His earlier words replayed in his mind, one by one, now stripped of arrogance and filled with consequence. He stared straight ahead, then slowly turned his head just enough to look. The man sat exactly as he had before. Same posture, same calm. Nothing about him had changed. Everything else had. The crew member's tone shifted subtly, unmistakably. "Thank you, sir," she said. "The captain wanted to personally welcome you aboard and ensure your family is comfortable." She gestured politely. "If there's anything at all you need, please let us know." The man smiled faintly. "Oh, thank you." The exchange was brief, but it carried weight. The crew member nodded once more and stepped back, retreating down the aisle with quiet efficiency. The silence that followed was different from before. This one wasn't tense. It was stunned. Passengers processed the realization in their own ways. Some sat frozen. Others leaned back slowly, absorbing it. A few exchanged glances that said everything words couldn't. The aggressor didn't move. His jaw tightened. His hands gripped the armrests. The confidence he had walked in with was gone, replaced by something closer to panic. He hadn't just insulted a stranger. He had humiliated himself in front of everyone. And worse, he knew it now. The man turned slightly toward his family, checking on them. His voice soft and reassuring. Whatever had just happened didn't matter to him in the way people expected it to. That restraint spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. A passenger nearby shook his head slowly, murmuring, "Wow." Another whispered, "That explains everything." The aggressor swallowed hard. He wanted to disappear. The realization wasn't just about who the man was, it was about what that meant. He had judged, he had assumed, he had spoken from entitlement, not understanding. And now, surrounded by witnesses, he had nowhere to hide from that truth. The man finally glanced toward him. Not sharply, not triumphantly, just briefly. There was no accusation in his eyes, only acknowledgement, and somehow that was worse. The aggressor looked away immediately, heat rising in his face. The humiliation wasn't public anymore, it was internal. The cabin began to breathe again. Low murmurs replaced the silence. People shifted, resumed small movements, but the energy had permanently changed. Respect had replaced curiosity. Awareness had replaced judgment. The man leaned back slightly, closing his eyes for a moment, as if grounding himself. Fame wasn't something he wielded. It was something he endured. And in that first-class cabin, thousands of feet above the ground, one truth became undeniable to everyone who had witnessed the exchange. Power doesn't need to announce itself. It reveals itself when arrogance collapses under its own weight, and the man who had chosen silence from the beginning had already won long before his name was spoken. The cabin didn't erupt after the reveal. There was no applause, no sudden noise, no spectacle. Instead, something far more powerful standled in, understanding. People returned to their seats slowly, almost carefully, as if afraid to disturb the moment. Conversations resumed in low tones, but they carried a different weight now. The tension that once hovered in the air had softened into reflection. The man remained exactly where he was. Same posture, same calm. If anything, he seemed relieved that the moment had passed. The aggressor sat frozen for several long seconds, staring straight ahead. His jaw was tight, his shoulders rigid. He had lost the ability to pretend nothing had happened, because now everyone knew. Not just who the man was, but who he had been. A flight attendant approached quietly, stopping beside the aggressor's seat. Her voice was calm, professional, and firm, the tone used when boundaries must be enforced without drama. "Sir," she said softly, "we need to speak with you." He looked up, eyes wide for a brief moment, then nodded stiffly. Whatever words he might have prepared earlier were gone now. He followed her a few steps down the aisle, away from the man and his family. There was no argument, no resistance, just compliance. Passengers noticed, not because of what was said, but because of how differently the situation was handled now. No humiliation, no raised voices, just quiet consequences. The man watched briefly, then turned back to his family. His attention never lingered on the aggressor. He didn't need it to. Justice, when handled with restraint, doesn't require witnesses. A few rows away, the woman who had first whispered earlier shook her head slowly. "That," she murmured, "is real strength." Her companion nodded. He didn't do anything, and yet everything changed. The man's family leaned closer to him now, comfortable again, unbothered by what had unfolded. They spoke softly, laughed quietly. Normalcy returned not because the incident was forgotten, but because it had been resolved with dignity. The plane continued its steady journey through the sky. Some passengers stared out the windows, lost in thought. Others scrolled through their phones, but their minds were elsewhere. The story they had just witnessed would stay with them long after landing. Because it wasn't about fame. It wasn't about power. It was about restraint. The aggressor returned to his seat later, quieter than before, eyes lowered. He didn't look toward the man again. He didn't need to. The lesson had already landed. People don't always learn through confrontation. Sometimes they learn through exposure, when their assumptions are stripped away and replaced with clarity. The man adjusted his seat slightly, resting back, his face relaxed. He hadn't come to teach anyone anything. He hadn't come to make a point. But he had made one anyway. That respect isn't demanded. It's earned by how you treat others when you think you're unseen. And arrogance. Arrogance collapses the moment it meets someone who doesn't need to prove anything. As the cabin lights dimmed further, and the flight settled into its rhythm, the story found its quiet ending. No speeches, no lectures, just understanding, the kind that lingers, because everyone on board had witnessed the same truth unfold in real time. You can be loud and still powerless. You can be silent and still command the room. And the strongest people in the world, they don't raise their voices, they raise the standard. Which moment stayed with you the most? The silence, the realization, or the quiet consequence? Share your thoughts. Stories like this help us shape what comes next.